Good morning. Last week we finished chapter 9, which means that we have a description of what the struggle inside the life of the Beinoni is. And now we are ready to describe what it looks like to succeed in that struggle to the farthest degree, what it looks like to succeed in that struggle to a pretty far degree. Then in chapter 11, the Alter Rebbe will tell us what it looks like to fail to the utmost degree and to fail to some intermediate degree. Then in chapter 12, the Alter Rebbe will tell us on what's a Beinoni. Hang on, let me fix the mic. Hear me now? All right. Before we begin, let's introduce an idea that is quite mysterious in the teachings of Chabad and Hasidus, and in the teachings of Kabbalah in general. There is a great big study on the question of who exactly is the person? Who is this human being? We're talking about two souls, the divine soul and the animal soul. In other places, the animal soul is referred to as the vitalizing soul, the human soul, the earthly soul, the soul of klipa, the soul of unholiness, the husk, the shell, the garment. So many names. And in some places, the human being is referred to as this soul. The animal soul is the human being himself, after all. The human being is the life of the human being. That's the human being. That means that the divine spark, the holiness, would be superimposed. But in other places, you have the divine soul. Sometimes it's called the soul of holiness. Sometimes it's called the soul of goodness. Sometimes it's called the spirit of man. Sometimes it's called the elevated spirit. Sometimes it's called the fruit. Sometimes it's called the treasure. Sometimes it's called the neshama. Sometimes it's called nefesh ha'adam, because Adam is the highest attribute of man. There are four names that a human being is called by, and Adam is the highest. So nefesh ha'adam is the highest one. It's a reference to the divine spark, the divine spirit. The question is, who is the human being? Is the human being really his animal soul? And then that means that the divine spark is superimposed. Or is the human being really, like we learned from the Shalah 2 weeks ago, his divine spirit, because the core of everything is divine, and that means that the klipa, the unholiness, the animal is what has been superimposed. That's the question. And then really there is a third enigmatic soul. Why enigmatic? Because we don't know where to place it. There is a soul called Nefesh HaSichlis, the intellectual soul. Is this intellectual soul part of the divine spirit? Is the intellectual soul part of the animal spirit? Is the intellectual soul inclined towards good? Is the intellectual soul inclined towards bad? The reason it comes up now is because we've begun to describe the struggle between the divine soul and the animal soul. And we are told that the human being needs to stir up his divine soul against his animal soul, or he needs to choose between his intellect, he needs to choose between his divine soul and his animal soul. Who is choosing? Is it possible to say the animal soul will choose the divine soul over itself? Who determines which soul sits in the driver's seat? We are told when the divine soul sits in the driver's seat, then the person could behave like a tzaddik. When the animal soul is in the driver's seat, then the person behaves like a behemoth, like an animal. But who determines who gets to sit in the seat? Is it just a one-to-one, man-to-man fight? Then what's the role of the human being precisely? And if the animal soul is in the driver's seat at any given time, then what's the hope that the divine soul should ever be able to take it back? Can you help the divine soul to ever take it back? Of course you can, because it says, Leilam yargiz adam yetzer teva yetzer hara. A person should always stir up his divine soul against his animal soul. Who's the you that's doing the stirring? Who's the you that's doing the decision, that's making the decision, that's choosing between good and evil, that's choosing whose thoughts to allow into the vessel of the mind? Who is this person? Where is the real work being done? Where is the real fight happening? And the answer is, it comes from the Eitz Chaim, and it's explained throughout Hasidus. That in truth, the real fight happens in your mind. The real fight happens in the intellect of the person. Is the intellect good? Is the intellect bad? Is the intellect inclined towards divine service? Or is the intellect inclined towards self-service? And the answer is, that's not the nature of intellect. Intellect is not inclined one way or another. Intellect is by nature dispassionate. It's inclined towards truth, towards clarity. Intellect appreciates clarity. Intellect appreciates facts, science. Follow the science. Dispassionately, without making a choice. Therefore, the way to understand it is as follows. The human being could be bifurcated into two souls, each one a complete physiology, intellect, emotion, expression, body, and soul. And that physiology is completed whenever, let's say, the divine soul gets control of the body completely, then the physiology is complete. The person is a complete divine physiology, body and soul, intellect, emotion, and expression. If the animal soul is in control now, the person is a completely animalistic human physiology, body and soul, intellect, emotion, and expression. However, that animal soul full picture is only when the intellect of the person has been cast under the control of the animal emotion, of the animalistic emotion. It does not have to be. It is not by nature under the control of the animal's emotion. Why? Because by the very nature of the human being, your mind controls your heart. And the only time your heart is allowed to control the mind is when the mind is either passive or has made a decision not to, or has made a decision to abdicate. Yeah? I heard an interesting thing last week that sheds a little bit of light on this subject. Did you know that although someone in the British royal family has officially denounced their capacity as a royal, they don't lose the title prince. And they don't lose their royal status. They only are stripped of any responsibility of officially representing the crown in any official capacity, but they retain all the, the title, and they remain a candidate for the throne if whoever is in line before them somehow doesn't. How can a person actually remove themselves from being a candidate, from being a successor to the royal throne? There's only one way. They have to become the king and then abdicate. They cannot say before they became the king, I don't want to do it. Only once they were in charge, only once they had the power, only then they can say, I don't want to do it anymore. You can only abdicate once you are the king. I don't know what the theory behind it is. I don't know what the reason behind it is. That's the fact, as far as I know. Same thing with the mind. The mind is in control, and only once the mind is in control can the mind abdicate and say, I don't want control anymore. I'm letting the heart take over control. Indecision, in the words of a shlucha, who is also a life coach, indecision is also a decision. You made a choice not to choose. You consciously, when your mind is king, the intellect rules the heart. The intellect made the decision not to make any decisions, not to think anything through, not to do the hard work of retaining control of the kingdom, instead to abdicate and let anarchy reign. It's only possible for the brain to make that choice. So what we have is, in the structure of the human being, you have the lowliest element of the human being, which is the animalistic urges that are not even productive for the safety and well-being of the human being. It's just debased urges, desires, lusting after things. You have the temperate desires of the animal soul. That means that the soul just wants to live and be happy, be comfortable, to survive, maybe to thrive, which is not essentially bad. You have the true noiga. You have the true parv, the true partial soul, which is the intellect of the animal soul, when the intellect is free of the influence of the animal's emotion. So long as the intellect is free from the animal emotion influence, it functions as intellect. It's dispassionate, it's clear-headed. It could hear an argument from the divine soul, and it could hear an argument from the animal soul. It will study the arguments. It could make a decision. You could think something through from the beginning till the end. You could make a cold, calculated decision, and that is called the intellectual soul. The intellect of the animal soul, when it is divorced from the animalistic urges and the animalistic inclination. That is the human. So when Tanya says, you have to make a choice, Tanya is talking to the Chabad of the animal soul. And as we'll see soon, unless you're a tzaddik. If you are a tzaddik, then you don't function in the Chabad of your animal soul. The real you is the Chabad of the divine soul. But that's the exception. That's a rarity. That's not normal. That's a tzaddik. The Beinoni, the average human being, functions most successfully in the dispassionate intellect of the animal soul, called the human spirit, the human soul, because that is what makes the human being unique and special above all the animals. Having said this, now the Alter Rebbe will go, having said this, now we'll go to chapter 10, and the Alter Rebbe will show us what is the maximum and what is the ultimate and what is the penultimate measure of success for a Jew who is serving Hashem, trying to gain control of the city, of the body, for his divine soul. Chapter 10, if you're following in the, I hope you're following in the Tanya. Here, the Alter Rebbe will begin to describe, and we'll spend the entire chapter. The Alter Rebbe will describe the success and the inner dynamic of the two levels of tzaddik that we described. We described the tzaddik called perfect and complete, and we described the tzaddik who is imperfect, incomplete. When we described the tzaddik who is perfect and complete, we called it tzaddik for whom it is good. And the tzaddik who is incomplete, we called him tzaddik for whom it is bad. And the Gemara is asking, how come some tzaddikim prosper and some tzaddikim suffer? And the Gemara's answer was, the tzaddik who is perfect will prosper in this world and will prosper in the next world. But the tzaddik who is imperfect, in order that he should only prosper in the world to come and not suffer at all in the world to come, Hashem spares him the suffering of the next life by causing him to pay up all his debts through suffering in this life. So the answer to the question, why do some tzaddikim prosper and some tzaddikim suffer? The answer is, when you see a tzaddik suffering, it's because he's an incomplete tzaddik. He is a tzaddik in whom there still is some evil. And he has to pay up for that in this life or the next. And Hashem, in his kindness, knowing that a lifetime of suffering in this world does not match a moment of suffering in the world to come, Hashem, in his kindness, will have the tzaddik pay up all his dues in this life, so that in the next life he can experience pure delight and joy and no suffering. Says the Alter Rebbe, the language of the Talmud is always perfect and very telling. So we will see in the language of the Talmud how he describes the tzaddik for whom it is good and the tzaddik for whom it is bad. You'll see the secret of the interior, of the internal dynamic of the life of this tzaddik versus the life of the perfect tzaddik. Now let's learn. Chapter 10, Vehine, having described the inner turmoil that exists inside the human being, using the analogy of two competing kings who want full control over the city, borrowing this analogy from Shlomo HaMelech, where he says the wicked king approached the city and wanted to conquer it, but saw inside of there were few citizens, and there was a wise man, a wise poor man whom everybody neglected. And of course, the translation of the analogy is the nasty king coming to conquer the city, that is the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the city with the few citizens, that is the body and the various limbs and organs, and the wise poor man who is neglected, who is not appreciated by the citizens of the city, that is the divine soul or the inclination to good, the Yetzer HaTov. So now you have the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov competing over absolute dominion, absolute control over the city and all its inhabitants, trying to gain absolute control over every expression of the body, thought, emotion, feeling, action, words, that they should only reflect the wishes. Each soul wants that this person, the whole body, it should become a complete physiological expression of him or her, the Yetzer HaTov or the Yetzer Hara. I don't know why it's him or her, they're both hers. But each one wants that the body should be an absolute, that the whole structure of the human being should be only an expression of its wishes, of its desires. Knowing this, now the Rebbe will go through, as we've said already twice, I apologize for repeating it, the Rebbe will take us through the levels of success. The tzaddik who is perfect, the tzaddik who is imperfect, the Rasha who is absolute, and the Rasha who is not an absolute Rasha, and then finally the Beinoni. Kishe ha'adam magabir nafsheho elikis, when the man, see that? That's why we had the introduction. Who is the man? The person. The person who strengthens his divine soul. The person who chooses his neshama over his Yetzer Hara, his Yetzer HaTov, his good inclination over his evil inclination. The person, like we said, the person is the brain, the mind, the intellect, the nefesh hasichlis, the intellectual soul. When he makes the good choice and he uses his mind to bring all of the parts of his self into line under the banner of the divine soul, the nilcham kol kach im habahamis, and he wages such an incredible war against the animalistic soul, ad shemigaresh umevaer hara sheba, until he expels and removes the evil from his heart. Mechalal hasmali, from the left ventricle of the heart, all of the evil that is of the animal soul has been expelled. Did he throw out the animal soul from the heart? Throwing the animal soul out of the heart is suicide, and that's forbidden. You can't do that. The animal soul is the body's function, life function. You cannot throw it out of the heart. You cannot throw it out of the body, but you can throw the evil of the animal soul out of the body by denying it any and all expression. So when you have the person, who is the person? The nefesh hasichlis, the human being who's using their mind to make a good choice. And this human being chooses to expel any and all expression of the evils of the animal soul from his thought, speech, and action, intellect, emotion, and expression. As it says in the pasuk. In the Torah, it says, "Ubi'arta hara mikirbecha." We have a commandment to, when there is a particular kind of sinner among us, the Torah commands that that person be executed, and thereby the evil would be removed and expelled from the nation. In order to execute a sinner, there are many, many conditions. Condition number one, the Jewish people need to be sovereign in our own land, and Torah law has to be supreme. Second condition, you need to have a court of 27 qualified judges. Another condition, the sinner needs to have been warned, and he needs to acknowledge the warning. And so the warning has to go like this. He has to say, if you do this sin, you will be executed in such and such a manner. And he says, I know that if I do this sin, I'm going to be executed in such and such a manner, and I'm going to do it anyway. And then he goes and does it. Such circumstances are very rare. And this exchange needs to be witnessed not only by the one who is warning him, but by the other witness as well. Needs to hear the warning, hear the man's response. The two witnesses need to be able to see each other. It's very rare. It's uncommon, certainly, that a person should actually be executed ever in a court of Jewish law. That being said, then what is the meaning of this commandment? Today, we are told that the Torah is eternal, that every mitzvah of the Torah applies always, in all places, and to all Jews, certainly, even to all people. Then what is then this must be a moral lesson. If it's not a practical communal community organizing lesson, if it's not a social welfare lesson like it is in its most simple sense, then what is it on a moralistic level? Says the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, way back, while we were reading the book of Bereshis, the book of Genesis, and we read how Yaakov and his family escaped from the house of Lavan, and they bought some land, and they settled near a town called Shechem. And then there was a very unfortunate event that took place in the city of Shechem, and the two of Yaakov's children orchestrated retribution. They took revenge against the city, and the result was that the Jewish camp, the family of Yaakov now had spoils of war from the city of Shechem, all kinds of jewelry, all kinds of precious items, all kinds of slaves. And Yaakov says to the household, now we have to leave this place because the neighbors are unhappy. Yeah, obviously in those days, every city was its own kingdom, and all the kingdoms need to have treaties with each other. They needed to make deals with each other, security partnerships, security agreements, where they would help each other out if there ever was an attack. So now Shechem's partners are going to have to come running to take revenge against the family of Yaakov for attacking the city of Shechem. Yaakov says, we need to leave. Where are we going to go? Hashem says to Yaakov, go to the place where we met earlier, Beis El, where you had the dream of the ladder going up, and I blessed you there. Go back over there. Yaakov tells his family, we are going to a holy place. They sail. Remove the foreign gods from among you. What? Children of Israel are carrying foreign gods among them. Where did they get foreign gods from? So the commentaries have to explain that that's their job. That's why we rely on them. And there are different opinions. Some say that Yaakov is telling the newly addended members. Is that even a word, addended? Why not? They have foreign gods with them because they still worship those foreign gods. Others say that in the spoils of war, Yaakov's family picked up dishes and jewelry, and the nations of the world have a habit of putting emblems, religious symbols on their jewelry and on their dishes, on their clothing and on their personal items. Yeah. So therefore, you have to study the items that you have and see if there aren't any religious symbols on those items, on those articles. You have to get rid of them. And Yaakov buried them under the tree and left them there. The Ur HaChaim HaKadosh says, read the verse carefully. It doesn't quite say, remove the foreign gods from among you. It says, remove the foreign gods from within you. And the Ur HaChaim HaKadosh says, who are the foreign gods within you? That's the Yetzer Hara. That is your inclination to do selfish things, things that are not for God's purpose. When a person hears the voice of his needy and greedy self and chooses to follow, that is obedience to a foreign god. You give credence to a force, you give credence to an opinion that has no foundation in truth or reality whatsoever. You who are the servants of Hashem, who were taken out of Egypt for the purpose of serving Hashem's ultimate plan, for fulfilling Hashem's ultimate plan for creation, you are going to allow yourself to be sidetracked, to be distracted, and to allow yourself to serve the purpose of something other than Hashem, even if that something is your own desire for pleasure and comfort. That's a foreign god. Says Yaakov, we're going now to the house of the Lord, Beis El. You have to remove that foreign god from within you before you can enter the house of God. On that Shabbos, when we read that parsha, the obvious moral of the story was, before you enter the shul to daven to Hashem, you have to leave your Yetzer Hara at the door, outside the shul. And that means your personal squabbles with other members of the minyan, your political views that have nothing to do with Hashem or his service, your business worries that belong in the weekday and don't belong on Shabbos anyway. And if you're coming to shul to daven during the weekday, leave your business also, your business and your personal interests. When you enter the house of Hashem, you have to come with a pure heart. Leave all your personal stuff at the door. Like Yaakov Avinu told his children, remove the foreign gods from within you, bury them under a tree, and then approach the house of Hashem to pray. This we learn from the Ur HaChaim HaKadosh and from the Kli Yakar. So on this verse that the Alter Rebbe brings, which comes from the Chumash Devarim, the 5th book of the Torah, the 13th chapter, the 6th verse, it says, "Ubi arto hara mikirbecha." Executing a sinner is for the sake of removing the evil from among you. But again, says the Ur HaChaim there, if you read it carefully, it doesn't say from among you, it says from within you. Remove the evil from within you. Expel the Yetzer Hara, the evil of the animal soul. In all of its iterations, remove that from within you. That is the commandment. And then your camp will be holy, like we learned from the Shalah 2 weeks ago. Your camp means your body. Then your camp will be holy and Hashem can dwell within you. Hashem can dwell among you. Your physiology, your thought, speech, and action, your intellect, emotion, and expression will be a home for God. That's the goal. So when you have a human being who has successfully done this, and he has expelled his animal soul's evils, meaning he has expelled the Yetzer Hara, the inclination towards meaningless delight and pleasure, or even the inclination towards doing what is best for me, as opposed to doing what is needed from me by Hashem, this person, his heart is empty within him. The left side of his heart, where the Yetzer Hara usually lives, it's empty. There's a vacuum. What happened to the evil that used to be there? Well, now there's room for love of Hashem to pour over from the divine soul into the left side of the heart, and the person's life will be animated by a love for Hashem. Beautiful. Yeah, but what happened to the evil that was there? Says the Alter Rebbe, V'yein hora nehepach letoiv mamash. In such a tzaddik, when he has achieved the eviction of the animal soul's evils from his heart, he has not transformed the animal soul. He has not won over a partner in the service of Hashem. The animal soul remains on the side of evil. It just has no expression of that evil. Such a tzaddik is called tzaddik she'eino gomor. This is a righteous person in whom not every part of his physiology or her physiology from all sides and from both sides is holy, is good. That's called a tzaddik who is incomplete. V'nikra, and therefore he is also called, v'tzadik v'ra loy, a tzaddik who has evil to him. See, that's the Gemara's language. And the Alter Rebbe told us the Talmud's language is perfect and very telling, and it gives us an insight into the internal dynamic of this tzaddik. He is a tzaddik. He never sins. Not only doesn't he sin, he has no urge to sin. Not only has he no urge to sin, he has no interest in doing anything self-serving at all, ever. It never comes up in his mind. It never comes up in his heart. And yet, there still is evil to him, because he has not managed to transform the evil of his animal soul. He has merely managed to evict it from its heart, from the seat of its expression, from its seat of influence. But it is still what it was. And that is from klipas noiga, which has some evil in it. Dehainu, what does it mean that he has evil to him? Sheyesh bo yadayin me'at mizeir ra. That means he still has a tiny drop of evil becholol hasmoli in the left side of his heart. Elo shekafuf uvatel atov machamas miuta. It's just that it is so overwhelmed by the goodness of this tzaddik that it is completely bowed and submitted in submission to the Yetzer HaTov. It's there, but it is cowed. It is silenced by the overwhelming amount of holiness and good that fills the life of that tzaddik. Now, I think we've done this before, but let's review. The language that the Alter Rebbe uses here is of the where the evil is removed from the heart of the tzaddik. The language is bitul. Bitul means nullification. Nullification means you take something that exists and you make it as though it does not exist. It's very important to understand the dynamic of that exchange. You take something that is and you make so that it is like it is not. You're not making believe it is not. You do something to make that which is seem like it's not. But it still is. In halacha, the term bitul is like from Pesach or from the laws of kosher and non-kosher. On the day before Pesach, we say, all of the leaven and the bread and the chametz that is in my property, I declare it hereby nullified as if it is the dust of the earth. Is it the dust of the earth? No, it's not the dust of the earth. It's leaven, it's chametz, it's bread, and it's in your house. You didn't find it, so you declare it batul, as if it's not there. How so? Because you removed your thought from it. You remove any and all interests from it. Now it's ownerless, and something that is ownerless might as well not be, because it serves no purpose for nobody. Next, in the laws of kosher and non-kosher. So there's a section in halacha that discusses how you determine whether a food that had non-kosher mixed into it, whether it's kosher or not. And there are different degrees. Sometimes some non-kosher will fall into something kosher. And if there is even 1% more kosher than there is non-kosher, then the non-kosher becomes nullified by the majority. Batul beroiv. 49% to 51% makes the non-kosher batul, nullified, as if it's not there. In most cases, by rabbinic decree, it has to be 60 times the volume. So the non-kosher needs to be overwhelmed by 60 times its own volume in order to be considered batul, in order to be considered as if it's not there. In some cases, it has to be nullified by, it has to be overwhelmed by 200 times its volume in order to be considered as though it's not there. Yeah. And so on and so forth. The point is that when we say that something is batul, we're not saying it's transformed into kosher. It's not transformed into kosher. It's merely as if it's not there. You know what else we're not saying? We're not saying that it's not there. It is there. We're treating it as if it's not there. So here you have a tzaddik in whom the evil of his animal soul is what? It's batul to the goodness that's in the tzaddik's heart, to the goodness and holiness that fills the tzaddik's life. Are we saying that the evil of the animal soul has become goodness? No, we're not saying that. That's not what batul means. You know what else we're not saying? We're also not saying that the evil is not there. It is there. We're treating it as if it's not there. That's batul. That's bitul. So in this tzaddik who managed to evict the evils of his animal soul from any and all expression in any and all areas of his entire physiology, thought, speech, and action, intellect, emotion, and expression, they're all absolutely clean from any expression of the animal soul's evils, and they're all 100% harnessed, hitched to the divine soul's goodness. But the animal soul still has evil to it, and that evil is still in its place in the left side of the heart. Until the tzaddik will manage to really, actually transform it into something good. Then you don't say it's batul. It's not batul anymore. It's good, and it has full expression, just like the divine soul, because goodness in the life of a tzaddik is given free reign and full expression. You wouldn't call that batul. Now, because the evil inside the life of the tzaddik is so, of this kind of tzaddik, the tzaddik that is not complete, the tzaddik that is still ra loy, he still has evil to him, because this tzaddik, the evils is not felt at all. He has no experience of this evil in him at all. Therefore, one could imagine that the Yetzer Hara is not even there. And therefore, it's not incorrect to call this person a tzaddik if the definition of tzaddik means he has no Yetzer Hara. He has no experience of the Yetzer Hara. He has no interaction with his Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara has he doesn't have a seat at the table. He doesn't have a voice. So it's correct to call this man a tzaddik because his Yetzer Hara does not bother him Like it says, we learned in the first chapter that the tzaddik is a person who is judged only and solely by his Yetzer HaTov, meaning it's the only voice he hears is the good side of his personality. Let's read. And therefore it might appear to him as if he sent it away and it has left him completely. Kuloi, all of it, legamre, 100%. But it's all in his imagination. That is what it feels like, but that's not the truth of his situation. The Yetzer Hara is there, cowering in a corner of the left side of his heart, having not been given any opportunity for expression. Avol be'emes, but the truth is, ilu chalaf v'holach le'legamre kol hara sheboi, if all of the evil of the animal soul were truly expelled, hoyanepach l'tov mamosh, then the animal soul would transform to goodness literally. That seems to be a contradiction in terms. If it were expelled, it would be transformed. If it's expelled, then there's no one there to transform, no? Where Rabbi Chaikin shared a story about Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson. Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson was one of the first Chabad educators, representatives that the previous Rebbe sent to the United States to till the earth, to prepare the area for the arrival of the previous Rebbe and Chabad Hasidim. And he moved to Brownsville, and he moved around in Brooklyn, and he did a lot of work for the previous Rebbe, and he educated a lot of children. Rabbi Chaikin says there was one young man in the yeshiva in New York who really wasn't fitting in, and he really wasn't working out, and the yeshiva threw him out. So Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson goes to the head of the yeshiva and says, I do not permit you to throw him out. After all the work was done, the bottom line is the boy couldn't stay there. So Rabbi Jacobson called his nephew in Canada and says, I'm sending you a boy, treat him like your own. And he did for a while, and he called back and he says, I can't have this bacher living in my house. I have girls at home. I can't have a bacher. And Rabbi Jacobson says, I'm your uncle. You have to listen to me. This boy is staying in your house, and you're going to treat him as your own. And you can, okay, so the end of the story, of course, is that the boy grew up and he overcame his troubles, and he has a beautiful Jewish family that's worthy of being proud of. If you threw him out, you can't fix him. If you threw him out, then there's nobody to elevate, there's nobody to transform. There are so many stories. I'll share one that we heard from Rabbi Yossi Jacobson, Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, about the Chazoin Ish. The Chazoin Ish was the Rav of the city and the dean of the yeshiva, but he hired a Rosh Yeshiva. And the Rosh Yeshiva caught a boy smoking on Shabbos and threw him out. So the Chazoin Ish summoned his Rosh Yeshiva and asked him a simple question. Since throwing a boy out of yeshiva is a matter of spiritual life and death, and on matters of life and death, you need to have a court of 27 judges, did you assemble a court of 27 judges to discuss the question of whether or not you should throw this boy out of yeshiva? Says no. So then you can't throw him out of yeshiva. But then the Chazoin Ish said, you got to let him back in. And the Rosh Yeshiva said, it's me or him. If you want me to run the yeshiva, I have to be able to run it my way. You can't impose, override my authority. There'll be nothing left. Me or him. So the Chazoin Ish says, you're telling me that if I bring him back into the yeshiva, you're gonna leave the job, right? That bringing him back into the yeshiva is tantamount to firing you and taking away your livelihood. Says the Chazoin Ish, it turns out that When it comes to matters of life and death, you need a court of 27. And just, relying on the opinion of one expert is not enough. But when it comes to financial matters like employment, you need a court only of 3 judges, or you can rely on the opinion of one expert. And I, the Chazon Ish, I happen to be an expert. And so you're fired. And the boy's back in yeshiva. Anyway, of course, after a while, the Rosh Yeshiva came back and the Bachar came back, and the warmth and the appreciation that he felt towards the head of the school, the dean, for that, for defending him and sticking up for. Anyway, the boy stayed in the yeshiva, and of course, the end of the story is that as long as he's there, you can transform him. But if he's not there, then there's no one to transform. That is the story here in the end of this, what we just read. The Alter Rebbe writes something that seems to be a contradiction. He writes, the truth is that if the ilu cholaf, if it had departed, v'holach lo legamri, and completely went away, kol hara shaboy, all the evil that was in it, hoyanepach l'tov mamash, it would be transformed to goodness. Either it left, or it stayed and you transformed it. But this takes us back to what we said earlier, way at the beginning. A human being is made up of 4 layers. There's and we'll go from the bottom. There is the evil, absolute, inane, insane, obsessive, self-indulgence, destructive. That's filth. It's very much a part of the human being. It's very much a part of the conscious life of every human being. I just want things that feel good, whether they are good for me or not. If it feels good, I want it. That's the lowest level of human. That's lower than the animal. Soon we will read, we read about it in the daily Tanya portion of Chitas a few weeks back, where the Alter Rebbe says to the Alter Rebbe instructs the Beinoni, say to your Yetzer Hara, you're the lowliest of all the lowly creatures in the world. Because of all of the creatures in the world that God created, you're the only one that could consciously, purposely, wantonly harm yourself. No other animal does that. Self-sabotage, a lion doesn't do that. A lion doesn't do things knowingly that are bad for it. A pig doesn't do that. Only the human being is capable of destroying him or herself consciously and knowingly. And that makes the animal so low, that makes this portion of the animal soul, that lusting, that desire, the inconsolable and unsatiable desire for everything that's comfortable and everything that sparkles and everything that anybody else has that makes them smile, that the animal soul has this thing in it that I need it also. It's the most debased, the most destructive, the most idiotic, the lowliest thing that ever existed in the face of the earth. Nothing is lower than that. Nothing. That is referred to. You could say is referred to by the title Enosh. Enosh is one of the 4 names that Torah has for humans. Enosh. And as the angels said, Mo Enosh Kiz Hizkirenu. Why, God, should you pay any attention to these Enosh? You want to give them the Torah? You want to take them out of Mitzrayim? You want to split the sea for them? Mo Enosh Kiz Hizkirenu. Of what value is this Enosh, this lowly, creepy, self-destructive Meshuganer, that you're going to give him your Torah? And Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you answer them. You answer the angels. Until the angels heard the Jewish people on their highest level, called Adam Le'elyon, where the Jew has the spirit of God in him. Adam Le'elyon, similar to God. That's the divine spirit. That's the Nefesh Elikis. In between, there are 2 levels. Gever. Gever is the animal soul that simply wants to survive and thrive for selfish reasons, but there's nothing innately evil about that, other than that it's selfish. But that could be transformed when that part of the animal soul could be convinced that serving Hashem is the best option. But then you have the Ish. The Ish is really the driving force of human emotion. The driving force of human emotion is that point of intellect that dictates how you're going to feel about something. So you could say that Ish, you could say Adam refers to the divine soul, and Ish refers to the intellectual soul, but the lowest two, Gever and Enosh, refer to the evils within the animal soul. Now, says the Alter Rebbe, if you succeed in chasing away the evils from the animal soul, you will have succeeded certainly in transforming, not the evils of the animal soul, you expel the evils from the animal soul, but you will have certainly succeeded in transforming the animal soul into a power, into a force for good. So now let's read it again. Ilu cholaf v'holach le'legamre kol harasha boy. If you would truly succeed in sending away and in removing all the evils that are in the animal soul, then the animal soul would certainly have been transformed into something good, into a force for good, into a power that could be harnessed to the wagon of godliness. And as the Chachomim say, Rav Tfuos b'koyach shoir. The ox produces much more than the human being working by himself. When you can harness the wild beast of the ox to your plow, to your wagon, to your grindstone, you can produce much more than just a human being by himself. And that's really the power of transformation. When you transform your animal, meaning your animal soul, into a partner to work with your divine soul in serving Hashem, the incredible spiritual product will be much, much more than if it was just the divine soul working on its own. And that's the goal. So this is the inner dynamic of the tzaddik who is called the not complete, the incomplete tzaddik. When we come back, God willing, next week, we will study more the life, the inner dynamic of the tzaddik who in fact is perfect, and the difference between the two kinds of tzaddik. Thank you very, very much for joining. Have a blessed week and a wonderful Chodesh Adar too. And y'all are invited for a brief haircutting ceremony for our son, Shali Bali, next Wednesday between 5 and 6 p.m. We're not making a big to-do. Just come, give him a bracha, give a little tzedakah, cut some hair. And that's it. So.
Thank you. Have a good week, everybody.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was great. Thank you.